When I'm 64. The Beatles song When I'm 64 seems to connect age with decline rather than a wisdom. Well, I'm 64 and I have therefore been living with depression for a very long time. I have made many mistakes, but I now believe that I have learned how to live with my black dog, for at last I have her trained. But it has been a long, slow shift in power from her to me. I imagine there is a gene with depression written in some fancy script on one of my chromosomes. My grandfather and my mother had that gene, and now in my extended family, others share this gene or short straw. My early childhood may also have contributed to my depression. My mother was often depressed, and as she had no treatment, there were long periods when she was removed emotionally as I was growing up. I tried constantly to please her, but telling her I loved her, or giving her presents, or doing well at school never seemed to cheer her up. Once I came second in my class and was praised by my teachers, so I ran home to tell my mother. But she was only interested in who had come first, and why I had not managed to get a higher place in class. I slowly learned how to live with depression. My most important lesson was when, after 46 years, I was given a diagnosis for years of suicidal thoughts, sleepless nights, difficulties in my relationships, and an unexplained lack of energy. It was a huge relief to know that my problem was depression, not failure, weakness of character, or a flawed personality. I had an illness shared by many others, including some famous people like Abraham Lincoln, Virginia Woolf, and Samuel Johnson. Once I had the diagnosis, I was able for the first time to seek appropriate treatment. In my case, it was medication that was most helpful, though I had the usual frustrations of finding the right medication and of waiting for it to take effect. I also made the common mistake of going off the medication too early, of relapsing, and of not seeking help quickly enough when the black dog was nudging me. To paraphrase Peter Cook, I have learned from my mistakes and can now repeat them almost exactly. I found a good psychiatrist who listened to me and was very helpful, and later I got myself an understanding general practitioner. When the black dog wags her hateful tail, I now seek help immediately. The warning signs are suicidal thoughts, poor sleep patterns, and particularly dwelling on negative ideas in the early hours of the morning. Once, after being hospitalized, I was concerned about going back to work as a teacher. I said, "I don't know what I will tell the students when I return to school." One of the other patients replied, "Tell them the truth." When I returned to the school, I went into my class and one of the boys asked, "What's been wrong with you?" And I answered, "I have been in hospital for depression." It was one of the rare lessons I gave when I had absolute silence and interest from the whole class. After the lesson, many of the students came and talked to me about their own problems, and although they were young, I felt my relationship with them had changed to a much deeper level. Recently, Geoff Gallup won respect for being open about his depression. Perhaps he was even more respected for this honesty than for his successful years as Premier of Western Australia. For many years, I had used a variety of escapes as my ways of dealing with depression. When I was a child, I used to daydream when I was unhappy. In these dreams, I would rescue people from burning buildings or from shark attacks. I would compete in Olympic Games, outswimming Olympian Dawn Fraser, or create great works of art. As I grew older, my escapes were more physical. I would travel or run away overseas. Later, I drank alcohol or worked far too hard, and twice attempted suicide. But the dog always chased me ferociously. Now, I have turned to face her, and she has taken a step back. A psychologist once told me that depression is a distortion of perception, so that you see yourself and the world in a very negative way. He then added rather cynically, depressed people may have the right perspective and the rest of us may be wrong. It is true there is much sadness in the world. Poverty, social injustice, war, corruption, and such things can weigh you down. I remember though, after 6 weeks in hospital, walking in the grounds one spring day and seeing flowers and birds and realizing I had stopped looking at beautiful things for a long, long time. I have only to think of my travels to wonderful places or of the good people I know to realize that the world is a magnificent place. I'm also luckier than many others with depression, as I have lived for 26 years with my partner, who has a good understanding and tolerance of depression. My friends know that I suffer from depression periodically and are tolerant if I withdraw from them at such times. Some are very comforting to be with, even when I do feel down. I try also to find things that give me solace. I love music, and while I may choose a maudlin adagio rather than an energetic allegro when the black dog is at my side, music does help. Walking in the country or by the sea has helped me, as it is difficult not to see beauty when 2 huge sea eagles fly above you or when a school of frenetic dolphins swims past. I have used meditation to help me relax. I try to take care of myself in all aspects of my day-to-day life. I have also constantly sought education about depression and have tried, without being too boring, to educate others. It is a physical illness like any other, and it should be treated as seriously and as without discrimination as any other illness. There are constant medical advances. Even over my lifetime, antidepressant medication has become more effective, and there are new forms of treatment such as cognitive behavioral therapy and even experiments with the effect of light on mood. One size or treatment does not fit all, but you learn what suits you. I know I'm fortunate, and many people with depression are lonely and quite isolated. But there are groups to join, or there is individual counseling and members of 24-hour helplines who will listen in the early hours of the morning. I try always to put something, however small, ahead of me to look forward to. A walk, a film, a day out. So now, at 64, I'm a happy person, and when the black dog sneaks up behind me, I turn and face her quickly. Suicidal thoughts, disturbed sleep patterns, and excessive stress are early warning signs, and I do not delay seeing my general practitioner. I know which medication helps me. I rest. I do not drink alcohol at such times, and I listen to my partner and friends, as they are keener observers of my moods than I am. I am not ashamed of depression and recognize it is an illness, and it is treatable. There are worse things to live with than the black dog, especially now she obeys my orders. I just wish I had learned more quickly how to live with her. Now I'm older, I think of Voltaire's encouraging words. It is true I am rather deaf, rather blind, and rather crippled, and that this is capped by 3 or 4 atrocious infirmities, but nothing deprives me of hope. Finding a way to live with depression has been a long journey, but an interesting one. And I'm probably a better person now than I was when I was young. Anyhow, as I'm 64, I will hope for a Valentine, a bottle of wine, and a few more years to enjoy my life. Learning to live, not suffer. The drugs that didn't get away. A simple poem saved my life. It wasn't a poem written by Shakespeare, Milton, or Keats, or even a witty rendition from Goodfellow. The disjointed words, the fractured rhyme, and scribbles in the margins came from my own pen. Time does not stop. The ticking of the clock does not stop, nor does the passing of time. Leave tomorrow where it belongs and start living your life from today. Leave that moment in time that we seek to grasp, to hold and nurture in our hands, to share, to show off days that have passed. It is a yesterday dream on today's time. Try not to waste the hours, the minutes at hand, because we will never get the time again. Don't live in tomorrows where unsaid words and deeds dwell. Tomorrows are only future yesterdays. All are lost in time. Don't sit and wait for the perfect moments, that mystical one's only chance. For as we wait, the time flies by. One day, an end will meet all our tomorrows, leaving those special moments and chances with nowhere to go. Use your time well and do your kindness now, for the ticking of the clock does not stop, nor does the passing of time. I'm no journalist or paper writer, so to do such a thing in my state of mind was quite odd. I don't really believe in miracles, but me writing that day did come close in hindsight. The actual words I wrote were not all that poignant to anyone other than myself. It was all about a ticking clock and wasted time. I have bipolar disorder. Of course, the wasted moments were the dark spots in my daily life. I could lose whole weeks and even months to those black spots, and I'm sure others know what I mean. After my initial diagnosis with the condition, the stigma of my mental health became a real issue that didn't just go away with taking of a pill. Though medication did help and continues to help me function in our dysfunctional society. It was hard to offer an opinion only to have it slapped away with an offhand remark about me having mental problems or that I should seek further mental help. These remarks only fueled the decline in my health and state of being. In a hospital, fighting for my grip on the so-called normal world, I made a decision. It was nothing startling. In fact, it was a dull moment in my room of 2 months. If I wanted to get better, to be strong enough to wear the remarks of others, I had to understand what was happening to me. I started writing down my thoughts. At times, they were erratic, dark, depressing things that seemed to stick to the end of my pen as I dragged it across the page. On rare occasions, the musings were of laughter, friends, and love, but all were disjointed, haphazard doodlings that seemed to bleed like a thick syrup from my mind. The ticking clock poem, one of my first to make any real sense, helped me understand something about my illness. I didn't have to let it rule my life, the time I had, and I didn't have to live in an eternal depressed or drugged out dumbness. There were choices open to me, many choices, and most, if not all, were beneficial to my health and future. The first was to not only take medication, but to really understand what it was doing for me. There are many views on medications, but I have come to know and understand fully what I am like when I don't take them. A very tough lesson and a very tough thing to accept when I was still so young. The poems I wrote daily helped me monitor my mood and pick up on what I considered unreasonable thoughts. Looking at the window and thinking, it's dirty, is reasonable. Looking at the window and thinking, I want to put my fist through it, is unreasonable. It's simple when you start to accept a few things about yourself and how your mind works. Cognitive therapy became my next and perhaps best active choice. It is fine to take drugs to rectify the unhappiness and the massive mood swings, the highs and the deep lows, but it is another to learn what created them in the first place, and then slowly undo all those unhelpful bits of your past. The future doesn't need to become a repeat of yesterday. The great Anthony Robbins, business and personal motivator, once said, "The past does not equal the future." Oh, how true this statement is. Every day is a new future come to life, a new start. Some of those days were not all that bright, but I now understood that everyone has a bad day or two. So I sat back and rode with the tide for a bit, and soon the brightness returned. You don't have to be up all the time, just as much as you don't have to be down all the time. Most of the time I am pretty neutral, pretty much like the rest of the world's population. After a 20-week course in cognitive restructuring, I came face to face with a tiny piece of the past that became the foundation of my life. I was responsible for the death of my baby brother, Scott. At the age of 2, I had blamed myself for his succumbing to sudden infant death syndrome, and as a result, I cemented into my child's understanding that I'm no good. For 32 years, I'd lived a child's understanding of death, and after 20 weeks, I broke free of that belief. After the course, I discovered it was time I rectified my past so it didn't equal my new future. I thought the process of changing this deep thought, or core belief, as it is known, would be tantamount to raising the Titanic. But it turned out to be a small change of words, nothing dramatic, nothing complex. I exchanged "I'm no good" for "I'm as good as anyone else." There were no miracles performed that day, but it was a start. I took a baby step forward and took control of my life. The new thinking helped me move from heavy suppressive medication to the new, yes, stronger, antipsychotic and antidepressant drugs. These energizing and mind-clearing tablets helped me to improve even further. The elation and freedom that came with this change in outlook and actions continue to help me when those dark days trap me in bed, or turn a warm summer's week into a shadowy pit of despair. I understand the medication I must take, and due to my condition will have to take for the rest of my life, and I'm well equipped cognitively to deal with most stress-inducing situations, even the guy who calls me a mental case whenever he drinks too much. By accepting the help of my doctor, psychiatric nurses and even other sufferers, I now live a life rather than simply exist under the sufferance of bipolar. There are no quick fixes or easy cures for my bipolar, and I am by no means clear of those dark woods or the frightening dreams that haunt them. I must live partially within a set regime of medications and regular psychiatrist visits. I waste no time with my psychiatrist. We quickly review my progress openly, and we try to set out a good management plan to follow. If new and better medications become available, she researches them, and if she feels they might benefit my situation, we try them. Some work, some don't. But because we talk about the whole process while it is going on, management of my medications is safe and measured. I only ever stopped taking my medication once, a very dark time that I never want to visit again. I need the medication. Not all bipolar patients do. but I know my own mind these days and I know what it needs. I now had 2 working tools to make my life better. The poems still come. What I write now are observational in nature. My view of the world, and they are as much a monitoring tool today as they were all those years ago. I have lived with bipolar for more than 12 years, and that life has been full. It isn't easy some days, and my children have learned to take it easy on Daddy when he's a bit down. Nice kids. I consider myself lucky to have taken those baby steps, to have followed the suggestions of those trained in mental health issues, and to have been able to help myself enough so that family and friends could build a support base around me. I think that if I put all the weight on them from the very start, I would be a very lonely person today. It is true, the ticking of the clock does not stop, and nor does the passing of time. But so long as I take my medication and keep on saying to myself that I'm as good as anyone else, I will not die in abject depression or without saying good words to those around me. As I look back, I wonder if a miracle did happen. No one said they had to be big and surrounded by bright lights, did they? All it took were baby steps in the right direction. And by the way, I don't suffer from bipolar depression anymore. I have chosen to live with it instead. Chapter 2. Into the Void. Confusion and chaos at onset. I felt that I had lost myself as I remembered myself to be. The onset of depression is commonly very subtle. It can creep up over months or years as a troubling feeling of difference, a sense of apprehension, irritability of something not quite right. In the early stages, individuals often choose to keep such disconcerting feelings to themselves. Problems remain unspoken, thus preventing the possibility of seeking help early. Many of our writers said they had no clue about what was happening and that it was only in retrospect that they recognized the pattern of behavioral, cognitive, and emotional upheaval as an evolving state of depression. I had not seen it coming because I didn't know what to look for. For some, there is the immediate implosion and collapse of acute onset. For most, however, depression is like the unwanted visitor who arrives unannounced, unpacks bags and moves in. Usually, there is a progressive worsening of emotions and a pervasive sense of disconnection. Troubling feelings hover on the periphery of consciousness, clouding an individual's thoughts on waking, interrupting their work, and haunting them at night. Yet the problem remains ambiguous. There is no template with which to frame and understand such experiences. Most lack words with which to communicate or to describe this rising state of apprehension and sadness. The following excerpts illustrate the chaotic confusion that is typical of the initiation into an alien landscape and highlight some of the early warning signs that usually go unrecognized in the first episode of depression. I'd like to say that my depression hit me like a sledgehammer, but I think the reality was that it had been creeping up on me for years. I first experienced depression at the age of 17 in my last year of high school. I only recognized this in retrospect. At the time, I had no idea what was happening to me. Over a few weeks, the world started to look grey and strangely unreal. I began to feel an overwhelming physical urge to curl up in a dark corner as if I was a hibernating animal. Things that I previously did spontaneously, like answering questions in class and eating out, made me extremely anxious. Any noise, overwhelmed me. I cried as if I was grieving, but I could not explain why. It occurred to me that I might be losing my mind, and I became very frightened and tried very hard to hide it from everyone, including myself. I had always believed I could do anything if I tried hard enough, so I tried to talk myself out of what I was experiencing. It didn't work. I could not think properly. I felt confused and so indecisive that whether to have coffee or juice for breakfast, use the stairs or the lift, became excruciating decisions of immense importance. After a while, I felt so unwell that I worried whether I actually had a malignant illness and was slowly dying. I was ashamed at how dependent I became, frightened of being alone, but not comfortable being with people, relying on the patience of my boyfriend who had no idea what to do except treat me with care. In a few months, I went from top of many subjects in year 11 to failing my final year exams. And what was even more incredible was that I didn't care. In the beginning of my second last year of high school, I had been passionate about life, enjoying everything from politics to long-distance running. I was busy, organized, and able to easily prioritize what was important in my life. I had been sports captain, happily in love with my boyfriend, motivated and loving what I was studying at school, with clear and ambitious plans for future studies at university. Life was full and fantastic. And then, without anything I'm aware of happening, I lost all desire, all motivation, and everything slipped away. 35 years later, I recognized that this was my first bout of depression. I'm 14 years old, healthy, a little obsessed with my athletic pursuits, but overall a well-adjusted kid. Then fairly suddenly, the darkness moves in and I enter a new and terrifying phase of my life. I'm exhausted, not something I'm used to being. I become so tired, eating becomes a chore. I become flat and lose interest in everything and any sense of enjoyment. In fact, flat is only the beginning and far too soft a word for the despair that takes root. I can't seem to sleep despite crippling lethargy. Worse still, I can't switch my mind off. It nags at me incessantly. My parents look on in their own despair. They know something is wrong, yet feel powerless. When my tears flow, as they do all too freely, I see my pain mirrored in the faces of my family. When they cry too, it becomes unbearable. Things are happening so fast, I'm no longer attending school. I'm finding it hard enough to string words together at home. I watch TV, the news, and whatever else comes on. As I watch the newsreader, I'm convinced it's me that he's talking about. It's all out in the open now. I'm responsible for all the terrible things he's saying. My dad's a school counselor. He has some contacts and arranges an appointment with the doctor in a child and adolescent psychiatric hospital. My parents convinced me to go, that these people can help, and I'm so desperate now I'd go anywhere. I'm exhausted and feel like my world is caving in around me. I'm hardly able to speak. It's so intense I feel like I'm choking. I freeze up. I just can't talk apart from the occasional monosyllabic response. The doctor is worried. He can see I'm severely depressed and wants me to come to the hospital. The idea is too threatening, and we finally agree on me becoming a day patient, attending the school there. I'm started on antidepressant medication. This is my depression, lying on my bed for days on end at the bottom of a deep black sea, pressing down on me. Unable to breathe, think, move, crushed by the weight. My mind revolving around and around and around on the hopelessness, the self-hatred. Over and over the same old thoughts. I hate myself. I can't move. I'm worthless. I hate myself. I can't move. I'm worthless. The worst thing about depression, worse than not being able to get out of bed, answer the door, talk to friends, study, work, eat, move, worse than all of that, is the mind-numbing, stultifying, life-deadening boredom. While all my friends were turning their minds to career, marriage, children, and hobbies, my own mind was turning to a mush, the synapses staggering slowly, listlessly around and around, ploughing up the same old tedious furrow. You're a useless, stupid, lazy waste of space. Like a raw egg rolling around in a dish, like an old drunk staggering around a lamppost trying to find a footpath to take him home. My depression's been with me since high school. I didn't realize I had a problem. I thought I was normal. I thought everyone felt this way. I wondered how the other kids at school managed to be so cheery, to play sport, laugh with friends, study. I thought I must be weak. Looking back over my life, I can't remember a time when I didn't know depression. I was probably dragged out of the womb, thinking I'm not going to have much fun out here. A relative recently told me I had been a nervous little boy. Some people take great delight in telling you things you really don't want to hear, don't they? And the nervous little boy grew into an anxious teenager who wondered why he couldn't be normal. Why he experienced those awful hollow inside feelings. Why the past, present, and future seemed to have melded into a vast nothingness that would be the rest of my life. In retrospect, I now realize that I lived with depression for so many years, unaware of its presence. I thought it was normal to feel the way I felt, anxious and on edge all the time. Suppressing my emotions had become automatic, a way of life which I had come to accept as normal, so peace of mind was never an option. I knew something was missing, but was afraid to confront the issue in case of upsetting the status quo. Of course, this was a cop-out for fear of facing my own feelings. For a long time, the black dog lurked in the shadows, hovering on the outskirts of my personality, waiting for the right opportunity to pounce. He was finally brought to my attention by way of a car crash. After being unleashed, he moved lock, stock, and barrel into my home, my mind, and overtook my life like an unwelcome house guest. All the related conditions that go hand in hand with depression seemed to descend upon me all at once. Anxiety attacks, nausea, claustrophobia, and a constant feeling of choking. I think I was choking on the truth. My nerve endings felt raw as the smallest sounds made me jump. I suffered sleep deprivation caused by hypervigilance as my brain was on full alert 24/7, and there seemed no escape from the all-consuming fear that had become my life. I thought I was losing my mind and felt completely alone, except for him. Whenever there's any sort of crisis in our house, Mum cooks. Tonight, our plates are loaded with strands of slimy, pre-cooked chicken, canned peas, lettuce, beetroot, chunks of boiled egg, and quivering dollops of mayonnaise. "I'll never eat all this," Dad complains. But he does, and when he's finished, he bashes the cutlery into the center of his plate. "Can I get a cup of tea?" he asks me. I make him and Mum tea. I dunk Mum's tea bag in once and sit it on the edge of the sink. I shovel a teaspoon of sugar into Dad's mug, leaving the tea bag in, and give it a quick stir. Later on, he will turn the page of his magazine and squeeze the excess water out of the tea bag, leaving it to dry on the teaspoon like an abandoned life jacket. After I have done this, I shuffle off to my bedroom. Even though I'm 24, Mum comes to tuck me in, anxiously asking whether I have enough blankets and do I want hot water bottle because the nights are still quite cool and she doesn't want me to wake up in the middle of the night feeling cold. I lie beneath rows of leering teddy bears and peeling posters of out-of-date pop stars, relics from my adolescence. It's been a long time since I have lived at home. I can hear Mum and Dad's voices, low and urgent. "Maybe she should go to hospital," Dad's saying, emphasizing the should. Mum's rubber gloves creak and snap as she fills the sink with water for the dishes. It's comforting. I don't have real sleeps anymore. I fall into a synthetic oblivion, aided by the orange sedative Mum doles out every night after dinner. In this sleep, my limbs are sedentary and I don't dream. I always hope I'll wake up and everything will be normal again. Only that never happens. It started for me with sleep problems. Tired and wired at 4 a.m., falling deep into sleep at 6:30 just when my normal work day started. I had no idea about early morning waking being a symptom. I had headaches and neck and shoulder pain. For a mental illness, it was pretty damn physical. I was removed, like I was trapped in a perspex box a bit shorter than me. People would greet me and I would will myself to smile, but my face did not respond. As I sat with friends over coffee, I watched them from 5 meters away, as if my mind was standing in the corner while my body sat across the table, unresponsive. I felt like a cyborg on Star Trek, trying to understand humor and mimic real people's facial expressions. I sat at my desk and the numbers and words I used as a financial controller may as well have been ancient Sanskrit, for all the sense they made. Work piled up, social engagements fell by the wayside. I thought I had woken up with brain damage or a tumor. I felt stupid and slowed and my temperament warped and changed with my confusion and lack of sleep. I longed for the flu so I could stay in bed. Everything I wanted in life was right there under the blanket. I didn't understand. There were no solutions for the simplest of problems, and there was no escape from the circling pack of thoughts. I had weights on my hand, a slouching posture, and a tunnel vision. I ran into things. I had no sense of my own boundaries. I was bruised all over. My hearing was magnified beyond belief. A sniffing man on the other end of a train carriage could have led me to a murder. It took me months to recognize the symptoms for what they were. My particular black dog was a sneaky little fellow, an unassuming mongrel who didn't tread a clear path to my door. Rather, he snuck around the back when no one was looking, and under the auspices of an anxiety disorder, life stress and hormonal changes, he slipped through the side door. By the time I realized who was there, not only was he in like Flynn, but he'd taken up residence on the couch. I realized now, looking back, that I was living with the grey dog for many years. During that time, I felt a sense of nothingness. I had thoughts such as, life is meant to be hard. I just have to put up with it. And what other choice do I have? Increasingly, I had a feeling of hopelessness. Cunningly, the grey dog began to intrude more into my life. I started to forget what happiness was meant to feel like. I was in denial that anything was wrong. I realized now that I probably had to go through depression to get to where I am now. The first tangible sign of the black dog's arrival was when I started waking up most mornings between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. and worrying until daylight arrived. I soon became utterly exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally. I somehow continued to work full-time though, probably because of my drummed-in work ethic. But to do this, I became a recluse of an evening and every weekend trying in vain to catch up on some sleep. I increasingly avoided interactions with others, including phone contact, as any conversation seemed to deplete my already low energy. Increasingly, I was becoming enormously hurt by the remarks of others. Even the most minor criticisms left me reeling. I soon started losing it at work. I would often race away to cry somewhere in private. At times, my work colleagues discovered me, and so I blamed it on headaches, which I frequently had anyway. When the black dog lurks, we are hesitant, indecisive, humorless, and maudlin. We have headaches. Our vision and perspective is blurred. We are tired, listless, and bumbling, with aching shoulders, legs, and arms, as well as being a pain in the neck to those around us. On those days when the dark eyes of the black dog burn with a smouldering intensity, suicidal thoughts grow strong. It all started a few years ago. I'm not sure of the exact day or month. Depression is not the kind of illness that you wake up one morning and suddenly decide that you have it. It sort of creeps up on you while you're not looking. Slowly and gradually increasing in intensity as the hours, days, weeks and months crawl by. Depression never really crossed my mind at first. I was only 17 years old at the time. I didn't know much about depression back then, but I didn't think it could affect someone so young, and especially not me. I was first diagnosed with depression in my last year at high school. I remember my graduation week clearly. While all the other students were celebrating and looking forward to the future, I was walking around in my own little dark cloud. After our final school exams, most of my classmates headed north to party and have fun. I spent the weeks after graduation running away from home and planning how I was going to end my life. My metaphor for depression is a murky room, no windows and only one exit, locked from the other side. The room is stark and bare of furniture except for a gas fire that doesn't warm so much as leave a chill clamminess behind as it gorges on the air and leaves me to breathe in my own despair and smell my own fear. Hell is not other people. For me, it's being sealed in with my sad, morbid self and no other person, no ideas, no books, no music, nothing to distract me from my preoccupation with feelings of doom. I have malice in my body and self-loathing in my heart. I like my own company as long as I can reach out into the world and be a part of it. Depression makes me an island in a desolate sea. No one can thrive in this situation and be whole. Fortunately, it hasn't been as bad as this for a long time. Now, it's like walking in a dark street with my melancholy double until daylight comes and the doppelganger fades away. From childhood, I've always felt inappropriate. I would be ecstatic over trifles and the world would glow and I would expand outwards, but at other times I would shrivel inwards towards the gloom gathering in me. When I was 18, I had my first breakdown, one of my life's lowest ebbs. I was metaphorically shut in a tomb in an ever-deepening gloom where only death could reach me, as I morbidly wrote then. I bounced back but had recurrent attacks till at 28 I was diagnosed with depression and given medication. Depression is the dark room where negatives are developed. Chapter 3: The Slippery Slope. Sinking into depression. All people should be aware that the possibility is there for this to happen to any one of them. Depression is like a game of snakes and ladders. It feels like your fate can turn on the roll of the dice. You might scale ladders in a scramble to get on top, only to find yourself knocked down on a slippery path straight back to the bottom rung. Despite the signs and mounting feelings of impending breakdown, nobody at first fully believes that they have depression, that their lives are unraveling beyond their control. And so they soldier on. They keep moments of collapse firmly relegated to toilet cubicles or behind bedroom doors. They take sick days or plan a holiday. They become adept at fashioning excuses for their growing withdrawal and distance. They start avoiding phone calls. Above all, they keep their mask of normality firmly in place. So confronting is it to face the truth that something is wrong that sufferers tend to ignore, deny, and distract in the fervent hope that things will get better and that they will eventually return to a more balanced state of mind. Unfortunately, unchecked depression usually only gets worse, leaving the fundamental question: how does one flee oneself? This chapter focuses on the lived experience of depression, what it feels, smells, and tastes like. In our analysis of the stories, there was a striking consistency in the way people described their depression. The most common metaphors were of being trapped in a dark pit or windowless room, feeling as if walking through fog with a cloud constantly over their head, and fighting a separate entity, a malevolent presence that was attempting to take over their soul. Depression's signature is the experience of extreme isolation and loss. The stories that follow starkly illustrate this and convey some sense of the pain endured by so many. Confusion drags my thoughts in ever-tightening circles. The routine of my life is swept away, so much flotsam in swirling currents of sadness and grief, overwhelming in their intensity. It is familiar, this undertow that heralds a downward spiral. Not welcome, but accepted. I know well the process. Reality blurs. Imagination sharpens to a blade, slicing away optimism, hope, and joy. It fillets dreams, hacks into veins of inadequacy and self-loathing. The pitch-dark maw of depression welcomes me back with a fierce embrace, an overprotective mother clutching her child who arrives home from school camp. This embrace contains little comfort. Instead, it squeezes and stifles, smothering the passion for the extraordinary as well as ordinary delights seen, felt, heard, and tasted. All senses are dulled to everything except the darkness rushing to greet me. Gone is any pleasure in the sight of a blue organza sky smeared with tufts of white angora. Yesterday, the garden was a haven for getting close to nature, a source of peaceful productivity. Today, it fends for itself against the harsh climate of drought. The to-do list grows. Mundane tasks that have brought some measure of structure to waking hours slide and fall away unnoticed while a morass of emotions cling wraps my body and my mind. Simple pleasures are lost amidst ironstone days and sleepless nights, the dark hours filled with nameless phantoms which clamp me, wreathing to the bed with twisted sheets. Like a victim of recent summer storms, I lie by the roadside called life. Battered, broken, roots wrenched from the earth, bark stripped to tatters, revealing the tender, mutant core of my being. Even the promise of my grandchildren's smiles and laughter lacks the enticement to make me get in the car, drive 12 minutes, and visit. I am poor company and will shelter to free spirits from my lethargy. Perhaps tomorrow or perhaps not. Showing up for work day after day becomes a trial, a marathon of endurance. There is no celebrating my tenacity and bloody mindedness to get through 8 hours until I can remove the mask of professional amiability. Frequent visits to the toilet, to cry for no reason, are yet to be noticed. Though the truth will come when the mask falters, revealing the shadows reflected in my eyes. I should consider myself lucky that I'm still able to participate in a day job. Others cannot, as I could not have done 11 years ago. Soon, if I don't take preventative measures, the pool of despair will be too great. The will to fight bludgeoned to extinction by apathy. People with depression swim in the same stream. They paddle hard for happy days and dry land. The illness can strike like a stingray, leaving an agonizing barb without regard for the victim. It can invade as stealthily as the flu, coming in with the wind and staying as long as it desires. While it may not kill like cancer, it remains a life stealer. Depression lies behind the eyes of the sufferer, trapped in the brain. Nothing can compare with the bite of the black dog. It is indescribable and unimaginable to those who have not felt the savagery behind its bite, or to those who have not witnessed the terror of the attack on their loved ones or friends. You cannot comprehend unless you have felt or seen the teeth marks firsthand or shared in the experience of the pain and sorrow those wounds leave behind. I was 17 when the black dog first started to stalk me. It picked up on the scent of fear, apprehension, loneliness, and despair emanating from a friendless, gawky teenager fresh out of high school. I felt alone, unloved, unwanted, and scared. The perfect formula for the black dog to make a meal out of. 24 years later, and that wretched mutt still finds a bone or two in my life to gnaw on. I still bear the scars of the razor's edge, one of the many wounds encountered during countless dogfights I've had over the years. The inner wounds are far uglier, but thankfully no one sees them but me. However, I'm certain that all of you who have been bitten bear your own scars, seen and unseen. I know you can relate. Me writing this and you reading it undoubtedly proves one thing. We are fighters. we have already learned or are willing to learn how to live with depression. Learning to live with depression is, in essence, the same as learning to live with any chronic, debilitating illness. There are, however, a few key differences that make the experience of depression uniquely excruciating for the sufferer. First, depression is an illness of seclusion, of inaccessibility, which forces us so far inside ourselves that we're often rendered incapable of connection. Depression does not possess the specificity and the tangibility of an ulcer or broken leg. The darkness is silent and invisible to observers, making sympathy and identification more difficult. Indeed, many depressives yearn for something tangibly horrific and external that others can observe. I have looked into his eyes and swum in the depths of his darkness. These depths that we go into are as deep as the ocean, and just like the ocean, the deeper we go down, the darker it becomes. So it is with our depression. On the ocean surface, we can see things clearly, but as we dive deeper, our ability to see diminishes. Eventually, you can dive so deep that all light is shut out. Keep this in mind next time you are dragged down by the currents of life. If you are in the depths of your depression, know that your ability to see your life and its potential has greatly diminished. Do not be fooled by these depths. The depths are murky, there is barely any light, and your ability to see and negotiate what is around and in front of you is affected. I used to wake each morning with a sinking realization that A, I was still alive, and B, I still felt besieged. Needless to say, I wasn't exactly bounding out of bed, more like hauling myself from it, and then dutifully engaging in my daily battle against unwanted thoughts and feelings, which took an inordinate amount of energy. I was almost constantly sad, but worse, I felt total despair, because no matter what I did, there seemed to be no way out. Then there was the thinking, the continuous pondering, analyzing, self-criticizing, yammering, and yearning. It was constant, chaotic, and exhausting. Depression was like that for me. It seemed inescapable. It felt like my head was a hellish prison, a gloomy and frightening labyrinth, alive with relentless, malevolent beasts. It was like someone had taken out my brain and put it back in sideways, or as if the entire physical contents of my head had been pushed to the front, creating an unbearable, gooey pressure.